Luna. So I picked this quote because it more so shows the internal struggle that individuals would go through dealing with that. I thought that this was more so insightful of kind of like the natural the natural fear of, I want to say, public rejection that they would go through. I picked this video because it actually speaks on a young teenager actually deciding to transition herself, and she really kind of, her fears align a lot with what Luna is going through. That fear of persecution, almost, how she feels like she's hiding it, how she's felt that she's been so different for so long, and she felt it was only natural for her to hide. Whereas I feel like in Luna's perspective, like hiding would have been even more of an honest, natural reflex almost, because of how traditional her parents were, and it was very blatant from more so the way the father and mother carried themselves. The father went out and worked, the mother stayed home and made sure that the house and family were taken care of. So from that aspect, you can see both of their fears, because she actually speaks on the fear, her fear that the people around her weren't going to accept her because of how they spoke, and they had very traditional ideals as well. So I feel like these were very good examples of the natural internal fear that comes with coming out.
Figured like I
This is an example of, I want to say, this shows more so the breaking point that I feel like a lot of younger people would have to come towards to almost hit the point where they have to come out, where this is the more common this is the common breaking point a lot of people have to hit when they decide to come out. This is a very common mental scenario where they feel like they just can't do it anymore. They're losing themselves trying to hide. I thought that this was a really good example of that almost mental and emotional edge that they feel like they're just about to fall off of, in terms of their identity or how they see themselves versus how everyone else sees them. I picked this one just because it spoke about how this just spoke about the almost initial reaction that this is almost like that initial experience everyone will go through, where you go out and you kind of conquer your fears and worst case scenario happens. This is that the worst. This is almost like saying the storm has passed, but you have to get through it. This is kind of saying sometimes you'll think it can't get any worse in your current situation, but you almost have to push through. And I spoke on this one just because I wanted to kind of almost validate Liam's fear and saying that's a very real possibility when this speaks about how a higher percentage of boys reported being bullied, and the fact that it's a 1 in 5 for students in the U.S. I think that statistic is a very big margin. So for a lot of the people who feel like they stand out or they are different, and more specifically in this case talking about trans people, this would be a very real fear of them in terms of persecution by their fears. And I use this statistic to almost help validate that with, like, that is unfortunately a very real possibility. This just talks about more so, and this talks about Liam's first experience going out, and how this almost reiterates my earlier subject on worst case scenario, where they would go out and they would have that negative encounter, and something would happen to challenge their resolve. And this just shows how much they have to want to be themselves, and that's an unfortunate reality. they have to want to be themselves against public ideals, or traditional public ideals, I should say. This talks about this one. I picked to speak on depression, and I feel like if Luna didn't have the support of Reagan, this could have been a very real possibility for her. And I'm talking about that in terms of just teenagers in the general. Depression is becoming a much larger problem. Suicide is actually killed almost with 18%. Suicide was one of the leading causes of death amongst people from about 20 to 24. So speaking on that, that is a very real fear, and I feel like Reagan's support in Luna, but in terms of just family support, that is what keeps people going through these challenges that they shouldn't have to go through. This is more so spoke on the percentage that I had just stated. This shows the danger in terms of that isolation and alienation that could have happened, that can happen. This is more so shows the why that people need so much support, whether it's coming out or anything. You need to be supported, and this shows the danger of that lack. And this doctor actually speaks on the idea of what gender is, and the idea of almost just why transgender happens. It's a mental thing. People don't talks about transgender and how people feel misgendered. He's speaking on how people can feel that they are mentally not the person that they are meant to be, that they see themselves differently from how the world does. And me personally, I enjoy the fact that he speaks on the fact of, instead of trying to correct them to traditional ideals, support them, because in the end of the day, he treats gender differently than he does sex, and he uses both those words, but he doesn't use them interchangeably. And I feel like that was really important because it shows the difference. He defines gender as how someone feels, their mentality. If they feel like they are boy or girl, or if they feel like they don't have a gender, they might feel like they're both genders. But he leaves gender up. He leaves the idea of gender up to the person that they are applying it to. Now he says sex is one thing, but gender is a mental feel. And so he speaks on what gender dysphoria is, and how a lot of trans people actually suffer through that, which is what the younger person actually spoke about earlier, in terms of how in her earlier school years she felt out of place, she felt different. You see a lot in terms of transgender people, they struggle a lot with gender dysphoria. So I feel like in terms of an individual going through this, I would be terrified. I'd probably, me personally, I'd probably turn into my younger sister as my closest confidant, because we are so close. She would be my Reagan in terms of Luna's situation. But for me, I'm honestly able to understand the terror that they would feel, and the amount of just resolve it would take to decide to take those first steps and understand that there is no going back. Because for a lot of people, once they decided to take that step and decided to transition, that was it. And they were going with it, with whatever consequences came about that. They had to choose themselves over everyone else. And so I truthfully can respect that.